A ribbon of cracked asphalt climbs into the Blue Ridge Mountains. No guardrails, no streetlights, just oak and hickory pressing close on both sides like walls closing in. At the end of that road sits a gas station. Boarded windows, kudzu crawling up the walls, a sign so faded you can barely read the name. 12 years since anyone turned the lights on. Inside, behind the counter, a pair of reading glasses sits next to an unfinished crossword puzzle, untouched, waiting. And behind the register, hidden in a panel that nobody was supposed to find, a leather journal, hundreds of pages, hundreds of names, hundreds of secrets a dead man carried alone for 40 years. A woman is driving toward this place right now. She has $200, a cardboard box, and no idea what she's about to discover. The courtroom smelled like floor polish and regret, and the kind of silence that settles over a room when something is ending but nobody wants to say it out loud. Marge Harlan sat in a wooden chair, hands folded, back straight, the way her mother taught her to sit in church. Except this wasn't church. This was the end of 33 years, and nobody was praying. The judge read the settlement terms into a microphone that turned his voice into something flat, metallic, like news from a radio in another room. Words she should have listened to more carefully. Words like irreconcilable, like division of assets, like final decree. Final. She let that word sit in her chest for a moment. Final. Leland wasn't there. Of course he wasn't. He'd sent his attorney, a man named Barrett. Charcoal suit, silk tie, the kind of watch that costs more than a car. Barrett kept checking that watch like he had somewhere better to be, which he probably did, because Marge Harlan's marriage ending was just another appointment on a Tuesday afternoon. Barrett slid a sheet of paper across the table. Heavy stock, typed in a font that looked expensive. "This is the asset schedule," he said. Not unkindly, but not kindly either, just efficiently. The way you talk to someone whose feelings aren't part of the transaction. The Briar Creek residence, vehicles, retirement accounts, investment portfolio. These remain with Mr. Harlan per the terms of the agreement. Marge nodded. She'd already nodded 1,000 times in this process. Nodding was what she did, what she'd always done. 33 years of nodding. You retain the Ford pickup, personal effects, and the real property located at Route 11, Goshen County. The real property. That's what they called her father's gas station. A building she hadn't seen in over a decade. On a mountain road she barely remembered how to find. Leland's lawyers had appraised it at $14,000, which sounded like a number until you put it next to everything Leland was keeping. Then it sounded like what it was, a rounding error, a leftover, the thing nobody wanted. Barrett pointed. Marge signed. 4 signatures, 2 initials. And her marriage became a stack of documents in a manila folder that Barrett tucked into his briefcase with the same care he'd give a restaurant receipt. Done. 33 years. Done. She picked up the cardboard box from under the table. Inside were the things Leland had left on the kitchen counter for her to collect. Not handed to her, not packed with care, left on the counter, like items for goodwill. A jewelry box her mother had given her. The velvet was wearing thin at the corners. A photo album from Jolene's childhood. The spine was cracked. A coffee mug that said "World's Best Mom," with a chip on the rim that had been there for 15 years. Marge had kept using it because Jolene had picked it out at a drugstore when she was 9. Leland had always hated that mug, said it was tacky, said real mugs didn't have words on them. 33 years. And this is what fit in a single box. She could carry her entire marriage in one trip. The parking lot was bright. Too bright. The kind of afternoon sunlight that makes everything look overexposed, like a photograph left in a window too long. Marge set the box in the bed of the truck. The Ford was a 2006 model, 160,000 miles, cracked dashboard, passenger door that stuck unless you lifted the handle and pushed with your hip at the same time. Leland had bought it for the landscaper who quit after 2 weeks. The truck sat in the driveway for years, gathering leaves, gathering rain, gathering the particular kind of neglect that happens when something belongs to no one. Then, Marge started using it for errands. Groceries, dry cleaning, the quiet, invisible tasks that kept a household running, while Leland built houses and portfolios, and a reputation as a man who knew the value of things. When the divorce was final, Leland told Barrett she could keep the truck. Generous. That was the word Barrett used. Mr. Harlan has been generous in this regard. Marge sat behind the wheel, engine off, hands on the steering wheel at 10 and 2. The leather was cracked and warm from the sun. She stared through the windshield at the courthouse, a brick building with columns, the kind of building designed to look important, to make you feel small inside it. And she realized she had nowhere to go. Not temporarily, not in the sense of needing to check a map. She had nowhere to go in the largest possible meaning of those words. The house on Briar Creek was Leland's now, officially, though it had stopped being hers long before any paper said so. She had no apartment, no job, no friends who weren't really Leland's friends, who weren't really the wives of Leland's golf partners, women who would send a sympathy text and then stop calling by Thursday. $211 in a checking account that would soon have only her name on it. She was 58 years old, sitting in a parking lot, in a truck nobody wanted, holding a box of things her husband considered worthless, and she couldn't think of a single person to call, not one. She pulled the deed from the folder on the passenger seat. The paper was old, creased from years in a file cabinet at the county clerk's office, typed on a typewriter, not a computer. A typewriter. That's how old this document was. Harlan Gas and Service, Route 11, Goshen County, deeded to Marge Ann Harlan, per the last will and testament of Emmett Robert Harlan, deceased. Her father had left her the station when he died 12 years ago. She'd driven down for the funeral, spent 3 days sorting through his things, locked the door, and never went back. Leland said the property wasn't worth the taxes, and Marge hadn't argued. She never argued with Leland about money, about decisions, about anything. That was the arrangement, the unspoken contract underneath the marriage contract. You agree? He decides. Everyone's comfortable, except comfort. She was learning. Isn't the same as happiness. It's just the absence of friction. And you can live your whole life without friction and never once feel alive. Marge turned the key. The engine caught on the third try, coughing, sputtering, then settling into the rough idle of something that refuses to quit despite every reason to. She pulled out of the parking lot and pointed the truck south, toward the mountains, toward the only thing she had left. The drive took 4 hours. Interstate gave way to two-lane highway. Two-lane highway gave way to county road. County road gave way to Route 11, and Route 11 was something else entirely. A ribbon of cracked asphalt climbing into the Blue Ridge through tunnels of oak and hickory. The trees were just beginning to turn. September. Edges of gold and copper bleeding through the green, like a secret the forest was starting to tell. Marge cracked the window. Mountain air filled the cab. Cool, damp, smelling like leaves and wood smoke, and underneath that, something older. Rock and soil and time. She remembered this road, not from 12 years ago, from longer, from summers as a girl. Her mother would drop her at the station in June and pick her up in August. 2 months with Emmett. Learning to pump gas, make change, check oil levels. He taught her to read a tire tread, to listen to an engine and hear what was wrong. She could change a fan belt by the time she was 12. Leland found that charming when they first dated. A girl who knew her way around a carburetor. How delightful, how quirky, how unusual. Later he found it embarrassing. A real estate developer's wife, hands that smelled like motor oil. He never told her to stop. He just stopped mentioning it, stopped asking about it, and eventually she stopped doing it. The way you stop doing anything when the person closest to you acts like it doesn't exist. You don't quit. You just fade. Slowly. Until the thing that made you you is just a memory you're not sure actually happened. Route 11 climbed higher. The trees thickened. Marge passed a few houses set back from the road. A church with a gravel lot. A general store with a closed sign hanging crooked in the window. Then the road curved around a granite outcrop. And there it was. Harlan Gas in service. Smaller than she remembered, which is what people always say about the places of their childhood. But it wasn't just memory playing tricks. The station was genuinely small. A single-story cinder-block building with a flat roof and 2 pump islands out front. The pumps were locked, rusted. Their price displays frozen on numbers from another decade. $1.29 for regular. From a world that didn't exist anymore. Kudzu had crawled over the south wall. Thick ropey vines reaching for the roof like fingers. The sign above the door, hand-painted by Emmett himself, had faded to ghosts of letters. You could see where the H had been, where the G started. But the rest was just shadows on wood. One of the front windows had a crack running corner to corner, sealed with duct tape that had dried and curled years ago. The porch railing sagged in the middle. The concrete apron out front was cracked, weeds growing through the fractures. But the building was standing. The walls were solid. The door, when Marge tried it, was locked tight. She fished through the box until she found the ring of keys from the manila folder. 3 keys on a steel ring. The second one fit the front door. The lock resisted, then turned with a gritty click, and the door opened. Inside, the air was still, thick with dust, the kind of stillness that happens when a space has been holding its breath for 12 years. Late afternoon light filtered through the dirty windows, pale rectangles across the concrete floor, motes of dust drifting through the light like slow snow. A wooden counter ran along the back wall, dark wood, scratched, grooved from decades of elbows and coffee cups and hands sliding change across its surface. Behind it, a pegboard hung with hooks that once held snack bags and road maps, the cash register, an old mechanical one with actual buttons that clicked when you pressed them, sat in the center of the counter, its drawer slightly open, like a mouth mid-sentence, and beside the register, exactly where he'd left them, Emmett's reading glasses, wire-rimmed. One temple slightly bent from the time he sat on them in 1998 and bent them back with pliers instead of buying new ones. Next to the glasses, a folded newspaper open to the crossword puzzle. 27 across was filled in with his careful block letters. 28 across was blank. He'd been working on it 12 years ago, and then he stopped, and nobody ever filled in the next word. Marge picked up the glasses. The lenses were dusty but unbroken. She cleaned them with the hem of her shirt, a reflex from childhood, finding them on the workbench, on the truck seat, on the porch railing. Emmett was always losing those glasses, and Marge was always cleaning them and handing them back. She set them on the counter, carefully, like they were the most valuable thing in the building, which they were. The station was one large room, counter in back, stockroom behind it. To the right, a door to the repair bay, a 2-car garage Emmett had built himself in the 70s. To the left, narrow stairs climbing to the apartment above where Emmett had lived for the last 20 years of his life. After Marge's mother passed, Marge climbed the stairs. The apartment was cramped but intact. A bed with a bare mattress, a dresser with 3 drawers, one of them stuck, a small kitchen with a 2-burner stove and a refrigerator that hummed when she plugged it in, like it had been waiting. The bathroom had a stand-up shower, a medicine cabinet. Inside, Emmett's toothbrush, a bottle of aspirin that expired 8 years ago, a bar of soap still in its wrapper. She opened the window above the bed. Mountain air rushed in, pushing out the staleness, replacing it with something alive. From up here she could see Route 11 curving down the mountain, and beyond it, ridgelines layered in blue and gray, fading into distance, one behind another, like the earth was showing her how far away everything was. Marge sat on the mattress, The springs creaked. 58. Broke. Divorced. Sitting in her dead father's apartment above a closed gas station on a road nobody used anymore, with $200 in a cardboard box and no plan. No plan. She'd never not had a plan. Leland always had a plan. For both of them. Where they'd eat. What they'd wear. When they'd retire. Which friends they'd see Saturday night. The plan was the architecture of their marriage, and Marge had lived inside it the way you live inside a house someone else designed. You don't question the walls. You just walk through the rooms. And now there were no rooms. She didn't cry. She'd done her crying. Weeks ago, alone in the guest bedroom of the house on Briar Creek, while Leland slept in the master suite with the door locked. She'd cried into a pillow so Jolene wouldn't hear on the phone. She'd cried in the shower so the sound was covered. She'd cried in the truck in the grocery store parking lot because it was the only place that was entirely hers. The crying was finished. What she felt now was different. Quieter than grief. Emptier. Like standing in a house after the furniture has been moved out. The rooms are the same, but nothing is where it was. She went back downstairs as the light was fading. The station felt different in the dimness. Not abandoned. Something else. Waiting. That was the word. The building felt like it was waiting. For what? Marge didn't know, but the silence had a quality to it. An expectation. Like the space between a question and an answer. She walked behind the counter, ran her hand along its surface, feeling the grooves, the scratches, the rings from coffee mugs. Her fingers found a seam in the wood paneling below the register. Not a crack. A seam. Straight. Deliberate. Cut with intention. Marge knelt down. The panel was about 2 feet square, fitted flush against the wall. But not nailed, not glued, just placed, carefully. The way Emmett did everything. She worked her fingernails into the edge. Pulled. The panel came away with a dry scrape. And behind it, a shallow cavity in the wall. Not large, maybe the size of a small suitcase. Inside were 3 things. A leather journal, thick, soft-covered, held closed with a rubber band that had lost most of its stretch, a metal lockbox, the kind you'd buy at a hardware store for $30, and a bundle of envelopes, bound with kitchen twine. Marge's hands trembled as she lifted the journal out. Not from cold, not from fear, from something she couldn't name. The leather was worn smooth at the edges, darkened where fingers had gripped it, thousands of times, over decades. She slid off the rubber band, opened to the first page, Emmett's handwriting, small, neat, slanting slightly to the right, the handwriting of a careful man. September 14th, 1981. Lent Tom Hendricks $200 for the electric bill. Wife is due in March and they can't afford to lose heat. Told him pay when he can. He won't be able to. But that's all right. Marge turned the page. Fixed Carol Dunbar's transmission. Charged her $30 for parts. Nothing for labor. She's raising 3 kids alone since Ray left. The oldest one helped me sweep the bay while Carol waited. Good kid. Quiet. Reminds me of Marge. She turned another page. And another. And another. Names. Amounts. Reasons. Every loan. Every free repair. Every bag of groceries slipped into someone's truck while they weren't looking. Every electric bill paid anonymously. Every winter coat left on a porch in a paper bag. Spanning decades. Hundreds of entries. In Emmett's careful hand. Each one a record of a kindness he never mentioned to anyone. Marge sat on the floor behind the counter, reading by the last light coming through the windows. The sun was dropping behind the ridge and the words were getting harder to see. But she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. Because Emmett had kept a running account of every family in the valley. Not their debts, their needs. He noted when children were born, when someone lost a job, when a roof needed patching before winter. He tracked the loans. Some people paid back. and quietly forgave the ones they couldn't. He wasn't keeping score. He was keeping watch. She opened the lockbox. Inside, $412 in small bills, 5s and 10s and 1s, a set of keys she didn't recognize, and a folded document that turned out to be the original deed to the property, passed down from Emmett's father, dated 1971, typed on the same kind of typewriter. The envelopes were harder. Her hands shook as she untied the twine. There were 8 of them, each addressed in different handwriting. All to Emmett. Thank you notes. One from a woman named Linda, whose family would have lost their farm. One from a man named Curtis, who said Emmett's $50 loan got him through the worst month of his life. One from a young mother who wrote on the back of a receipt because she didn't have stationery. Simple sentences. Misspelled words. Gratitude so plain and undecorated it hit harder than anything polished could. And Marge sat on the floor of a gas station she hadn't visited in 12 years, holding letters from strangers who loved her father and understood, for the first time, that Emmett Harlan hadn't just been pumping gas for 40 years. He'd been holding an entire valley together, with his bare hands, one small kindness at a time, and he never said a word about it, not to anyone, not even to her. Especially not to her. The last envelope was different, sealed, not opened, addressed in Emmett's handwriting. Marge. That was all it said, in his careful block letters, the same ones that filled the crossword puzzles, and labeled every tool in the repair bay, and wrote every entry in the journal she was holding. Just her name, on a white envelope, that he'd never mailed. She slid her finger under the flap, pulled out 2 sheets of yellow legal paper, folded in thirds. The creases were sharp, like he'd folded them once and never unfolded them again. Dear Marge, if you're reading this, you found your way back. I always knew you would. She leaned against the counter. The station was dark now. The only light was a thin blue glow from the window where the last of the sky held onto the day. I wrote this on a Tuesday in October. The leaves are turning and business is slow, which means I have too much time to think. That's dangerous for an old man with a pen and a cup of coffee. I want you to know something about this station. It isn't worth much on paper. A building inspector would condemn half of it, and a real estate agent would call it a teardown. But it's worth everything to the people who depend on it. Not the gas, not the repairs, though those matter. I mean the fact that it's here, that someone is behind the counter, that the coffee is on and the light is on and the door is open. That's what a place like this is for, not the selling, the being here. I know about Leland. I've known for a long time. You think you hit it well. But a father hears things, in the pauses, in the way you talk around something instead of about it. You get that from me, I suppose. Stubborn. He's not a bad man, Marge. He's just a man who measures everything in dollars and thinks that's the same as value. Someday you'll see the difference. I hope it doesn't cost you too much to learn it. This station is yours, not because it's worth money, but because you're the only person I trust to understand what it was for. Don't sell it. Don't let anyone tell you it's worthless. And if you can, keep the coffee on. That matters more than you think. The letter was signed with just his name, Emmett. Marge pressed the pages against her chest and held them there, the way you hold something that's alive, even though the man who wrote them had been dead for 12 years. Through the window, she could see stars appearing above the ridgeline. More stars than she'd seen in decades. More stars than suburban skies allow. The mountain was utterly quiet. No traffic. No neighbors, no television murmuring through walls, no Leland on his phone in the next room, no hum of a life that looked full but felt hollow, just silence and stars and the smell of dust and her father's words in her hands. She sat on the floor of his gas station, holding the record of a life she never knew he was living, and somewhere between the last page of the journal and the first star above the ridge. A thought took shape. She wasn't going to sell this place, that night. Marge lay on the bare mattress, staring at the water-stained ceiling, listening to the mountains settle into darkness. She couldn't sleep, not because of the mattress, not because of the unfamiliar room, because her mind wouldn't stop inventorying all the things she'd lost. The house, the savings, the routine, the identity. Mrs. Leland Harlan. That was who she'd been for 33 years. Not Marge, not Emmett's daughter, not the girl who could change a fan belt. Mrs. Leland Harlan, the developer's wife, the woman who hosted dinners, who remembered everyone's drink order, who kept the house clean and the calendar full and the appearance of a good marriage perfectly maintained. And now she was nobody. No, worse than nobody. She was somebody without a category. Divorced, broke, 58, living above a gas station. There is no Hallmark card for this, no section in the bookstore, no support group at the church that says, "Welcome if your husband kept the house and the money and the woman he was seeing, and you got a truck with a broken door and a building full of dust." She closed her eyes, opened them. The ceiling was still there. At 3 a.m, she gave up, got out of bed. The floor was cold under her bare feet. She walked to the small kitchen, turned on the light, a single bulb, harsh. She opened the cabinet, 2 things inside, a sealed can of coffee with a plastic lid, Emmett's brand, dark roast, the kind that tasted like it was arguing with you, and a box of chamomile tea, still in its cellophane, the kind Marge's mother used to drink, which meant Emmett had bought it after her mother died and kept it for 20 years, in case. Marge stood in front of the open cabinet, right hand on the coffee, left hand on the tea, and she could not choose. She literally could not choose, because she didn't know which one she wanted. She didn't know if she was a coffee person or a tea person. She'd been drinking whatever Leland ordered for 33 years. Leland drank coffee. Dark roast, so she drank coffee. Dark roast. At restaurants, Leland ordered for both of them. Chicken for her, steak for him. She never objected. It wasn't that he demanded it. It was that she'd stopped having preferences so gradually she didn't notice them leaving. Until now, standing in a dead man's kitchen at 3 a.m, unable to choose between coffee and tea. This is what 33 years costs. Not just a house, not just money. It costs you the knowledge of your own taste, your own wants, your own self. The small, ordinary things that make a person instead of a reflection of someone else. Marge stood there for a long time, maybe 5 minutes, maybe 10, holding the coffee in one hand and the tea in the other, and she felt something rise in her chest. Not sadness, not anger, something more frightening than either. She didn't know who she was, not in the existential philosophical sense, in the practical daily sense. She didn't know what she liked to eat for breakfast, whether she preferred mornings or evenings, what kind of music she'd choose if Leland wasn't in the car, what she'd watch on television if the remote was only hers. She'd spent 33 years becoming an expert on Leland's preferences, and she had no data, none. On her own, she put the tea back, picked up the coffee, not because she chose it, but because Emmett drank it. And right now, being Emmett's daughter felt closer to being herself than anything else she had. The stove worked on the second try. She heated water in a dented saucepan because there was no kettle, poured it over grounds in a mug she found in the second cabinet. The coffee was stale, bitter, too strong. It was perfect. She carried it downstairs and sat behind the counter in the dark. The station was quiet. The mountains were black shapes against a sky thick with stars. The journal was beside her on the counter, next to Emmett's glasses, next to the crossword, and she drank coffee that tasted like her father, and waited for morning. Because that's what you do when you don't know what comes next. You wait for light. Morning came the way it comes in the mountains. Slowly, then all at once. Gray light, then gold. Then the sun cresting the eastern ridge and pouring through the dirty windows like it had been saving itself. Marge washed her face in the bathroom sink, brushed her teeth with a finger and some of Emmett's expired toothpaste. It tasted like chalk and mint and 12 years of waiting. She made more coffee, carried it downstairs, and walked the property. The repair bay was in better shape than she expected. Emmett had built it himself, poured the concrete floor, hung the doors, 2 bays, one with a hydraulic lift that might still work. His tools hung on a pegboard that covered the entire back wall, organized by size, by type, each one outlined in black marker so you'd know if something was missing. Wrenches, sockets, screwdrivers, pliers, the rubber grip on his favorite ratchet worn smooth from use, everything dusty, but intact. Emmett took care of his tools the way other men took care of their cars, the way Leland took care of his reputation, which is to say, with complete and focused attention. Marge ran her hand along the workbench. Her fingers found the groove she'd carved into the wood when she was 9, dragging a flathead screwdriver while Emmett wasn't looking. He'd found it the next day, shook his head. Now the bench has character. That's what he'd said. She picked up a wrench, held it, felt its weight, and her hand remembered what her mind had spent 33 years trying to forget. The balance of a good tool, the way it becomes part of your arm if you hold it right. She set it down. Not ready yet, but not as far from ready as she'd been yesterday. She was on the front porch, sweeping with a broom from the stockroom, when she heard tires on gravel. An old Chevy truck, green, mud-splattered, pulling up slow. A man climbed out, heavy, slow-moving, plaid flannel shirt and a cap with a feed store logo. He stood in front of the building, hands on his hips, staring at the cracked windows and the kudzu-covered wall. Marge stepped to the edge of the porch. "Morning," she called. The man turned. His face was deeply lined, sun-darkened, white stubble along his jaw. He squinted at her for a long moment, processing. And then something changed in his expression. His eyes widened. He took off his cap. "Well, I'll be damned," he said. "You're Emmett's girl." "Marge Harlan, Odell Gentry." He extended a rough, thick-fingered hand, calloused, the hand of a man who used it for everything. "I live 2 miles down the mountain. Your daddy and I played cards every Thursday for I don't know how long. I remember. You used to bring corn from your garden." He grinned, missing a tooth on the left side. "Still do, though there's nobody to bring it to anymore." He looked at the station, then back at Marge. "What brings you up here? Haven't seen a soul at this place since Emmett passed." She could have lied, could have said she was assessing the property, something vague, something safe. Instead, she told the truth. Because she was tired, and because lying takes energy she didn't have. "My husband divorced me. He got the house and everything in it. This is all I have left." Odell nodded, slowly, the way mountain people nod, not with surprise, not with pity, with acknowledgement, like he was filing the information in a place where it would be treated with respect. He walked back to his truck, returned with a thermos and 2 ceramic mugs, poured without asking. "Well then, you'll need good coffee, not whatever ancient can you found in Emmett's cabinet." They sat on overturned buckets on the cracked concrete apron. Odell's coffee was strong, hot, better than anything Marge had tasted in months. "Tell me about him," Marge said. "Tell me the things he didn't tell me." Odell sipped, studied the mountains, took his time the way people do when the story matters and they want to get it right. "Your daddy was a complicated man in a simple way. Worked hard, kept his head down, didn't talk much about himself, but he had this thing about people. Couldn't stand to see someone struggle if he could do something about it. I found his journal, behind the counter. Odell's eyebrows went up. He wrote it down. Everything. Every family he helped. Every loan. Every repair he did for free. Odell shook his head, half smiling, half something else. That stubborn old fool. Never told a living soul. I only knew because I caught him once, 2 a.m, loading groceries into the Sutter family's truck. He told me he was reorganizing inventory. Odell paused, looked at Marge. Reorganizing it right into their back seat. Marge laughed. It surprised her. The sound of it in her own ears. Sudden, unguarded. She couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed like that, without checking first to see if it was appropriate. Folks around here still talk about him, Odell said. Quiet-like. Someone will mention that their lights stayed on because of Emmett, or their car made it through another winter because he fixed it for nothing. He turned the mug in his hands. Your daddy never turned anyone away who needed help. Said it was cheaper than church and did more good. They sat in silence. A truck passed on Route 11. The driver lifted 2 fingers from the steering wheel. The mountain greeting. Marge had forgotten about that. Emmett Harlan died owing nothing to anyone, Odell said quietly. And being owed by everyone. That was the richest a man could get. Odell left mid-morning with a promise to come back tomorrow, with lumber for the porch railing. And then the valley began to speak. A woman Marge didn't recognize pulled up in a minivan, left a casserole on the front step, a note tucked under the foil. Welcome home, Emmett's daughter. No name, no phone number, just the message. Marge didn't know who she was, didn't know how she knew Marge was here. Mountain news traveled without wires, without phones, without explanation. Someone saw Odell's truck at the station, told someone, who told someone, and by noon the valley knew. An elderly man came in a flatbed, left a stack of firewood by the side of the building. Wouldn't stay for coffee, just touched the brim of his hat and drove away. A couple brought cleaning supplies in a plastic bin, vinegar, rags, a new broom. They said Emmett had fixed their furnace in 1992 and refused to take money because he said they needed the money more than he needed the business. A teenage girl dropped off a bag of groceries, bread, eggs, milk, canned soup, a bag of apples. She waved shyly through the windshield and drove off before Marge could reach the truck. Each one left the same message, in different words, with identical meaning. Emmett helped us once. We're glad you're here. Then, late in the afternoon, a woman came who was different from the others. She was maybe 70, small, thin in a way that suggested a body that had worked hard and eaten last. She drove a sedan that was more rust than paint. She parked, got out slowly, holding the car door for balance, and she stood in front of the station, staring at it, for a full minute. Then she started crying, not loudly, not dramatically, the quiet kind. The kind that comes when something you've been holding for a long time finally finds the door. Marge walked out to her. Ma'am, are you all right? The woman looked at Marge, wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. My husband died. Winter of '97. December. I had 2 children still at home. The furnace broke. Middle of the coldest week of the year. I couldn't afford to fix it. I couldn't afford anything. She paused, steadied herself. Emmett came to my house at midnight. I never called him. I don't know how he knew. He fixed the furnace, took 4 hours, wouldn't take $1. And when I went to the mailbox the next morning, there was an envelope, no name on it, enough cash inside to get me and my children through the rest of the winter. Marge didn't speak. I never found out it was him, the woman said. Not until years later. Someone mentioned it. By then Emmett was gone, and I never got to thank him. She looked at the station, at the faded sign, at the cracked windows. I've been waiting 12 years to thank someone, she said. "I suppose you'll have to do." She didn't give her name. She didn't stay for coffee. She got back in her rusted sedan and drove away, and Marge never saw her again. But she stood on the porch for a long time after the car disappeared around the curve, holding a feeling she couldn't have named if someone asked. It was the feeling of standing in a place that mattered and beginning to understand why. Marge carried the groceries upstairs, put them away, made a sandwich, ate it standing at the window, looking down at the gas pumps, rusted, locked, hoses cracked, price displays frozen in time. Getting them running would cost money she didn't have, but the repair bay was functional, the tools were there, and she was Emmett's daughter, which meant she knew her way around an engine, even if she hadn't touched one in decades. She went downstairs, spent the afternoon in the bay, testing the hydraulic lift, checking the air compressor, organizing tools that were already organized but needed the dust removed. And her hands remembered the weight of a socket wrench, the resistance of a rusted bolt, the particular satisfaction of hearing a stuck mechanism break free. Her hands remembered what her mind had tried to forget, and she felt something that wasn't loss. She felt useful. Late afternoon, sun dropping behind the western ridge, the light going orange and long. Marge heard an engine struggling on the road, not the healthy hum of a car passing through, the labored grinding of something failing. She stepped outside and saw a white pickup truck limping toward the station, steam rising from under the hood like a distress signal. The truck rolled past the building. 20 yards, 30, then stopped. Dead. A young man climbed out, maybe 23, lean, sunburned, gray t-shirt with grease stains on the front, jeans torn at the knee, not fashion, function, boots that had been worn for work, not for show. He popped the hood and stared at the engine with the focused expression of someone who understood exactly what he was looking at. Marge walked over, wiping her hands on a rag from Emmett's workbench. Radiator. The young man looked up, surprised. Not that she was there, that she'd diagnosed it from 20 feet away. Hose blew, upper one. He wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. Marge could see the calculation in his face, the quick math of someone used to measuring what they could afford, which was usually nothing. "I've got a spare in the bed," he said, "but I don't have tools." "I've got tools." Marge nodded toward the bay. "Pull it in if it'll make it that far." He looked at her, then at the station. His face showed something Marge recognized because she'd spent 33 years wearing the same expression. The hesitation of someone who'd learned that help always comes with conditions, that nothing is free, that every kindness has an invoice attached. "I can pay for the bay time," he said. "I didn't ask for money. I said pull it in." His name was Sawyer Tanner. He drove the truck into the bay and had the old hose off in 6 minutes. Marge found a replacement in Emmett's stockroom. Close enough. 2 extra clamps and it would hold. She watched Sawyer install it. His hands moved with the quick, precise confidence of someone who'd been working on engines since childhood. "Where'd you learn to wrench?" she asked. "My grandmother's boyfriend had a shop in Boone. I spent every summer there until I was 16. He tightened the last clamp, stepped back, checked his work. "Haven't worked in a shop since. Last 3 places I tried didn't work out." He didn't say why. Marge didn't ask. She could read enough in his face to fill in what he wasn't saying. Young, no family support, probably sleeping in that truck. The kind of person Emmett would have noticed immediately. The kind of person Emmett would have helped before anyone asked. Sawyer poured coolant into the radiator, started the engine, listened. Satisfied, he closed the hood, wiped his hands on a rag from Emmett's workbench, and Marge noticed he hung the rag back on the hook, without being told, in the right spot. She looked at this kid, standing in her father's repair bay, using her father's tools, putting things back where they belonged, and she said something she hadn't planned, Something that came from the same place the decision not to sell had come from. Not from logic, not from strategy, from somewhere deeper. Somewhere that smelled like motor oil and coffee, and the particular kind of knowing that doesn't need a reason. "I'm reopening this station," she said. The words hung in the bay, between the lift and the pegboard, between the past and whatever came next. Sawyer looked at her, steady, not skeptical, not eager, just looking, the way you look at something when you're trying to decide if it's real. "I need someone who can turn a wrench," Marge said. "You don't know me. I know you replace that hose faster than most mechanics with twice your experience. That's enough for today." He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. He stood in the bay with his hands at his sides, looking at the tools on the wall, at the outlines, at the workbench with the groove a 9-year-old girl had carved with a flathead screwdriver. "I'll think about it," he said. "Come back tomorrow if you decide," Marge told him. "I'll have coffee on." He drove off down Route 11, taillights disappearing around the curve. The same curve the old woman's sedan had taken, the same curve every car took, coming or going, arriving or leaving. Marge stood in the doorway of the bay and watched until the road was empty. Then she went inside, locked the door, climbed the stairs, lay down on the mattress. The springs creaked. The ceiling was water-stained and low. Through the window, stars, more than she could count, more than she deserved, more than she needed. But there they were, and she had 2 objects on the counter downstairs that mattered more than everything Leland had kept: a pair of reading glasses and an unfinished crossword. And for the first time in longer than she could measure, she knew what she was going to do next. Sawyer's truck pulled into the lot at 7 the next morning. Marge was already downstairs, sweeping the front apron with a broom that was older than most of the trees along Route 11. She set it against the wall. Waited. The way Emmett used to wait. Not anxious, not eager, just present. Like the building itself. Sawyer climbed out, stood for a moment looking at the station, at the fresh light hitting the cinder-block walls, at the kudzu, at the faded sign, at Marge, standing on the porch with 2 mugs of coffee, one in each hand. He walked over. "Coffee's on," she said. "You said it would be." She handed him a mug. He took it, drank without asking what was in it, or how strong, or whether there was sugar. He just drank, and Marge thought, this is a person who has learned not to ask for things, because asking means owing, and owing means losing. "I'll work a week," he said. "See how it goes." "Fair enough." That was how it started. A mug of coffee, and a week to see how it went. Marge had made a list on the back of one of Emmett's old receipts. The kind of list that starts as a plan and turns into a confession. Every crack, every leak, every broken thing she could see from the front door. Windows, porch railing, gutters, kudzu, water damage in the south wall, pump islands, electrical panel, roof drainage, stockroom shelving, front door hinges, bay door tracks, a furnace that may or may not produce heat when winter arrived. The list filled the back of the receipt, kept going onto the counter, then onto a second receipt. Sawyer studied it, his eyes moving down the items with the focused calm of someone who understood that a building is just a collection of problems waiting to be solved, one at a time, in the right order. "You planning to rebuild the whole place? Just the parts that are falling down?" He almost smiled. Almost. The corner of his mouth moved a fraction of an inch. It was the closest thing to warmth Marge had seen from him, and she understood. Some people don't smile easily, not because they're unhappy, because they've learned that happiness is something that can be taken away, and the less you show, the less there is to lose. They divided the work without discussion. Sawyer took the bay, testing the compressor, bleeding the hydraulic lines on the lift, sorting parts in the stockroom by size and condition, separating what was usable from what was rust. Marge took the main building. She started with the kudzu on the south wall, pulling it by hand, vine by vine. The plant had worked deep into the mortar between the cinder blocks, roots threaded into cracks like fingers gripping a ledge. Pulling it free was slow, stubborn, the kind of work that punishes your hands and rewards your patience. By noon, her palms were raw. Her shoulders ached. Her back was making sounds she didn't know backs could make. She kept pulling, because the vine was everything she was fighting. It was 33 years of something growing over her until she couldn't see the walls underneath. Until she forgot there were walls. Until the thing covering her became more visible than the thing she actually was. Every vine she ripped free. She could see more of the building. Every vine. She could see more of herself. Odell showed up at 9 with a truck bed full of lumber and a toolbox that required both hands and a grunt to carry. He parked, climbed out, surveyed the porch railing with his arms crossed, the stance of a man who has opinions about wood and isn't afraid to share them. "Railing's rotten," he said. "I noticed. I'll have it done by lunch." He wasn't bragging. He finished by 11:30. Marge brought him water and watched him test the new railing, leaning his full weight against it. 240 pounds of Odell Gentry pressing against fresh-cut pine. The wood held. "Emmett would have used cedar," Odell said. "Emmett could afford cedar." Odell grinned. Gap-toothed. Genuine. "Pine'll do." That was the rhythm of those first days. Marge and Sawyer worked from sunrise until they lost the light. Odell appeared most mornings with materials and experience, and the particular brand of mountain stubbornness that treats a favor as an insult if you try to pay for it. Marge tried once, held out 220s. Odell looked at her like she'd spit on his porch. "Emmett helped me re-shingle my roof back in '98, he said. "Took him 3 days, wouldn't take a dime. Told me I could buy him a steak when I won the lottery." He hammered a nail into the porch step he was replacing, drove it home with 2 strokes. "Never won the lottery, so this is the steak." The pumps were the biggest problem. The underground tanks needed inspection. The pumps themselves were relics, museum pieces with price displays that didn't know what century it was. Marge called every fuel company within 50 miles. Most of them hung up before she finished her first sentence. A gas station on Route 11, a road that barely appeared on GPS, a location so far from anywhere profitable that the math didn't work no matter which way you turned the numbers. 3 companies, 3 refusals, polite but final, the kind of no that means we've already calculated the answer and you're not in it. The 4th company was different. The man who answered was named Grady. Marge gave him the pitch. Location, tank capacity, pump specifications. She kept her voice even. Professional. The voice of a woman who was pretending she'd done this before. Grady listened, then said the thing everyone said. "Route 11. That's pretty remote. I don't think the volume would justify." "I know the numbers don't work," Marge said, and she heard herself interrupt him, which she never did, which she'd been trained not to do by 33 years of letting Leland finish every sentence first. "I know the location is wrong and the road is empty and a spreadsheet would tell you to hang up right now." Silence on the line. She kept going, because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant doubting. And she was done doubting. "I'm standing in my father's gas station, selling gas on a road nobody drives, and I'm asking you to give me a chance to prove that there are things worth doing that a spreadsheet can't measure." Long pause, the kind of pause that has weight, that has a decision inside it. "Your father," Grady said. "His name Emmett Harlan." Marge blinked. "You knew him?" "Knew him." Grady's voice changed, softened. "When I was 26, I had 3 trucks and no money and an engine that threw a rod on Route 11 at 2 in the morning. Your daddy towed me in. Fixed the engine. Charged me half price. I told him I couldn't even afford half. He said a man trying to build something shouldn't be punished for it. Grady paused. I've got 42 trucks now, and every one of them runs because your daddy gave me a chance when the number said not to. He sent a crew the following week. They inspected the tanks, flushed the lines, installed 2 new pump heads. Marge signed a fuel contract with terms she could barely manage if enough cars stopped, if enough people remembered, if enough of Emmett's goodwill was still alive in the valley. It was a gamble. Everything about this was a gamble. But Marge was learning something about gambles. When you have nothing to lose, the math changes. The first customer came on a Thursday, an older woman in a white sedan. She pulled up to the pump island, rolled down her window, and stared. Are you open? We are. The woman got out slowly, holding the car door. She looked at the station, then at Marge, and her eyes filled. I used to come here every week when Emmett was alive. He always checked my tires, never charged me. Marge filled her tank, checked her tires. When the woman reached for her wallet to pay for the tire check, Marge waved her off. Your daddy did the same thing, the woman said, quietly, almost to herself. Exact same wave. After that, they came. Not a flood, a trickle, then a stream. People who lived in the valley and remembered the station, who remembered Emmett, who had been waiting, without knowing they were waiting, for someone to turn the lights back on. Marge bought a proper coffee maker with the last of the lockbox money, set it on a table just inside the front door, same spot Emmett had kept his. She told Odell she was going to burn through a pound of coffee a week. Emmett went through 2, Odell said. Emmett had more visitors. Give it time. She gave it time. And Odell was right. A man drove 45 minutes each way to get his oil changed because he trusted a place with Emmett's name on it. A woman brought her teenage son to meet Marge because she wanted him to know what Emmett had done for their family. An elderly couple who hadn't made the drive up the mountain in months came just to sit on the porch, drink coffee, and tell Marge about the time Emmett fixed their truck on Christmas Eve. He wouldn't let them pay. Said it was technically a holiday and he didn't work holidays, so there was nothing to charge for. The porch became a place, not just a structure, a place. People brought lawn chairs, left them folded against the railing between visits. An older man brought a checkerboard, set it on the porch railing, left it there. By the end of the first week, there was a running tournament that nobody scored officially, but everyone took seriously. And Marge, without meaning to, without planning it, started doing what Emmett had done. She learned their names, their families, their troubles, who was behind on bills, who needed a brake job but couldn't swing the cost. She kept the information in her head and in her actions, quietly. The man with the bad brakes picked up his car and found it fixed. The bill listed only the cost of the pads, nothing for labor. When he tried to argue, Marge said Sawyer needed the practice, which wasn't true. Sawyer could rebuild a transmission blindfolded, and that was when Marge made her first mistake. It was a Wednesday. Sometime during the first full week of business, a man came in with a grinding noise in his transmission. Old truck, older man, the kind of face that has spent 60 years outdoors and shows every single one of them. Marge looked at the truck, listened to the transmission, and quoted a price. $150, she said. Parts and labor. The man's face relaxed. He'd been braced for worse. He left the truck and Odell drove him home. Sawyer was under the lift when Marge walked into the bay. He slid out on the creeper, looked up at her. $150. That's what I said. The parts alone are $220. Marge felt her face get warm. Not embarrassment exactly. Something worse. Recognition. She'd quoted below cost. Not because she was being generous. Not because she was channeling Emmett. Because she couldn't say no. Because the man looked worried. and his face reminded her of every face she'd ever seen that was carrying more than it could hold, and she wanted to fix it. The way she'd spent 33 years fixing things for Leland, for Jolene, for everyone, giving pieces of herself away until nothing was left, and here she was, doing it again. "I'll cover the difference," she said, knowing she couldn't. Sawyer sat up on the creeper, his legs folded, his hands resting on his knees, grease under his fingernails. He looked at her the way you look at someone when you're about to say something they need to hear. "Emmett helped people," Sawyer said. Carefully. He gave when he could, fixed what he could, but he also charged fair when he needed to, because if he didn't, the station would close, and then he couldn't help anyone. Marge opened her mouth, closed it. "There's a difference," Sawyer said, "between being kind and not knowing how to say no." Emmett knew the difference. He gave because he wanted to, not because he didn't know how to stop. The words landed. Emmett gave from fullness. Marge gave from emptiness. And the giving looks the same from the outside. But it isn't. She went back to the counter, called the man, told him the price was $275, parts and labor, fair rate. He said that was fine, didn't argue, didn't flinch. He'd been prepared to pay more all along. And Marge hung up the phone and felt something shift, small, interior, like a lock finding its position. She could be kind, and she could be fair. And those two things didn't have to mean the same thing. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday. White, heavy stock, the kind of paper that comes from offices with marble floors and names in gold lettering. Return address she recognized immediately. Barrett and Associates. Marge opened it at the counter, standing next to Emmett's reading glasses and the half-finished crossword. She read it once, read it again, because the language was dense, legal, designed to be intimidating, which it was, but the meaning underneath was plain. Leland was filing a motion to include the gas station in the marital asset division. His lawyers claimed Marge had failed to disclose the property's true value during the settlement. They cited a planned state highway expansion that would reroute traffic within a mile of Route 11, which would increase the land's assessment significantly. They wanted the court to reopen the settlement, either award Leland his share, or force a sale. Sell the station, split the proceeds, walk away. Marge set the letter on the counter. Her hands were steady. Her stomach was not. She read it a third time, looking for a crack in the argument, a loophole, an error, some small procedural mistake that would make the threat less real. She didn't find one. She thought about calling a lawyer. She didn't know any lawyers. The ones she could find in the phone book would charge by the hour, and the hours would add up, and the fuel sales barely covered the contract payments and Sawyer's wages. The lockbox was empty. The checking account was thinner than it had been in the courthouse parking lot. She couldn't afford to fight this, which was exactly what Leland was counting on. That night, Marge sat on the porch alone. The mountains were dark shapes against a sky that was more star than sky. She could hear the creek somewhere below the road, moving water over rocks, the sound of something that doesn't stop, even when everything around it does. She thought about the families in Emmett's journal, people who had faced worse than this, with less than this, and the man who had quietly made sure they didn't face it alone. But Emmett wasn't here, and Marge didn't know what to do next. Jolene called on a Friday. Marge was closing up the station, wiping down the counter. The phone buzzed in her back pocket, and she saw her daughter's name and felt the complicated thing she always felt when Jolene called. Love, and distance, and the particular ache of knowing your child has chosen a side, and it isn't yours. Mom, Jolene, I heard about the lawyer's letter. How? Dad told me. Of course he did. Leland was building his case, the way he built everything. from the ground up, framing first, then walls, then the version of the story that everyone would see from the street. He'd told Jolene before Marge could, which meant Jolene had heard Leland's version first, which meant Marge was already defending. "He says the property is worth more than what was declared," Jolene said. "He says there's a highway coming through. There's always a highway coming through somewhere. Doesn't mean it's coming here." "Mom, listen to me. If the property is actually worth something, why not sell? Take the money. Get an apartment. Start over properly." Properly. There was that word, the Leland word. The word that means do it the way that makes sense on a spreadsheet. The way that looks right from the outside. The proper way. "I'm not selling." "Why not?" "Because this isn't about money." "Then what is it about?" Marge wanted to explain. About Emmett's journal, about the letters, about the woman who cried in the parking lot, about the vine on the south wall and what it felt like to pull it away and see the building underneath, about standing behind the counter and feeling useful for the first time in 33 years. But those things don't translate over the phone. They don't fit in sentences. They live in the weight of a wrench, in the smell of coffee at 6 in the morning, in the sound of gravel under tires when someone pulls in because they trust this place, because they trusted Emmett, because they're starting to trust her. "I can't explain it," Marge said. "Not in a way you'd understand right now." Jolene went quiet. Marge could hear her breathing, the slow, measured kind, holding something back. Then she said it anyway. "Mom, I'm worried about you. You're living in a building that should probably be condemned, working a gas pump, and now Dad is taking you to court. How is any of this okay? The furnace works. The building is fine. Who is that mechanic, the one working there?" "Sawyer. He runs the bay." "You hired someone with what money?" "Jolene, I'm handling it." "That's what you always say." Jolene's voice tightened. "That's what you always say. And then Dad handles it. And you agree. And nothing changes." The words hit. Not because they were cruel, because they were true. And because Jolene didn't know she was describing something much worse than a pattern. She was describing a prison, built out of habit and silence, and the kind of love that looks like support but functions like control. But Marge couldn't say that, because saying it meant telling Jolene that the father she admired, the decisive, confident, capable man she'd modeled her life after, had been slowly erasing her mother for 3 decades, not with cruelty, with certainty, with the absolute unshakable conviction that he knew best, about everything, for everyone, always. Some truths are too heavy to hand to your children. "I love you," Marge said. "I'll call you this weekend." She hung up, stood behind the counter in the dark station, and realized something she hadn't seen before. Jolene was doing exactly what Marge had done, agreeing with Leland because it was easier, because he had the answers, because he always had answers, and Marge had never shown her daughter what it looked like to disagree. Not once, in 33 years, until now. Leland came 3 days later. Marge heard the engine before she saw the car. Deep, smooth, expensive. The sound of money moving through space. A silver SUV pulled up to the pump island. New model, polished. The kind of vehicle that costs more than most families in the valley earned in a year. Leland climbed out. 61, looking younger, tanned, trim, navy polo, pressed khakis, sunglasses that cost more than Marge's monthly fuel bill. He put his hands in his pockets and studied the station the way he studied properties before buying them, assessing the bones, calculating the return. Marge. Leland. He walked toward her, taking his time. Sawyer was in the bay, visible through the open door. Odell had gone home an hour ago. "Nice little project," Leland said. He looked at the fresh paint, the new railing, the rehung sign, approving, condescending, without meaning to be either. You didn't come to talk about the project. Leland took off his sunglasses, folded them, slid them into his shirt pocket, and looked at her. She knew this look. The reading the room look. The measuring look. The look that calculated the fastest route to what he wanted. "I thought we could talk before the lawyers make this ugly," he said. "It's already ugly. You made it ugly when you filed. The property is undervalued. You know it and I know it. That highway expansion is going to pass within a mile of here. This land will be worth 10 times what it appraised for. And you want your share. I want what's fair." Fair. Leland's favorite word. It sounds like agreement. It looks like respect. Until you read the fine print. "You got the house," Marge said. Her voice was steady, which surprised her. "The savings, the retirement accounts, the investment portfolio. You got everything except a gas station that your own lawyers called a teardown, appraised at $14,000, which your team dismissed, without argument, because it wasn't worth arguing about." She paused, let the words settle. "And now, after I've been up here for weeks, after I've cleaned it, fixed it, reopened it, now you want it. I want what the court should have considered." "The court considered it. Your lawyers considered it. They looked at this place and saw a rounding error, and they gave it to me the way you give someone a broken mug, because it's easier than throwing it away." Leland stared at her. She could see the rehearsed conversation falling apart behind his eyes, the script going sideways. He had driven 4 hours expecting the Marge he remembered, the one who signed where Barrett pointed, who agreed because agreeing was easier than fighting, who hadn't argued with him about money or decisions or anything in 33 years. That Marge was standing in the same spot, but she wasn't the same person. "I'll see you in court," Marge said. Leland put his sunglasses back on, walked to the SUV, opened the door, stopped. "When did you become this person?" he asked. Not angry, genuinely confused, like he was looking at a building he'd appraised years ago and the floor plan had changed. Marge looked at him, standing in front of Emmett's gas station, in clothes that cost more than her monthly fuel bill, asking when she'd become someone he didn't recognize. "I always was," she said. "You just never looked." The SUV pulled out of the lot, gravel popping under the tires. Marge watched until the silver disappeared around the curve. Then she went inside. Sawyer was at the workbench, holding a socket wrench he hadn't been using. He'd heard everything, or enough. "That's your ex-husband. That's him. He always liked that. He wasn't always." Marge paused, looked at the letter on the counter, next to Emmett's glasses, next to the crossword. "That's what makes it hard." Sawyer set the wrench down. "You going to be all right?" Marge thought about it. Actually, thought about it. Instead of saying fine, instead of saying I'm handling it, instead of saying the thing you say when you don't want people to worry. "I don't have a lawyer. I don't have money for one. So I honestly don't know." Sawyer was in the bay 2 days later, reorganizing the filing cabinet. The green metal 4-drawer cabinet in the corner where Emmett kept his records, his meticulous alphabetical records of every family he'd ever helped. Marge was in the main room, wiping down the front windows with newspaper and vinegar. She heard the sound of Sawyer's work stop. Not slow down. Stop. A different kind of silence, heavier than concentration. She walked to the bay door. Sawyer was sitting on the milk crate, the same one Marge had used the first night she read through the folders. He had a folder open on his lap. He was staring at it. Not reading, staring. His eyes working, but his brain somewhere else. Somewhere deep. "Sawyer." He didn't look up. Marge walked over, stood beside him. The folder was labeled in Emmett's handwriting. Block letters. Neat. Careful. Tanner. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Emmett's hand. The same careful script that filled the journal, that labeled every tool on the wall, that wrote the letter Marge found in the envelope with her name on it. Clara Tanner, heart valve replacement. August 1994. $3,200, sent through the doctor's office as anonymous donation. Don't let her know where it came from. Sawyer's hands were shaking. Not a lot, not dramatically, but shaking. He closed the folder, pressed it flat against his knees, like he was trying to keep it from flying away, or like he was trying to hold himself down. "My grandmother," he said. His voice was tight, but steady, the voice of someone holding himself together by will alone. "She had heart surgery when I was a baby, summer of '94. She always said someone paid for it, anonymous, through the hospital. She never found out who." He looked up at Marge. His eyes were red, but dry, because some things go deeper than tears. "She told me that story every time I visited her. Every single time. She said whoever paid for that surgery was the reason our whole family existed, the reason my mother was born, the reason I was born. She looked for that person for the rest of her life." Marge sat on the concrete floor beside the milk crate. She didn't say anything. Some moments need silence more than words. "I didn't know she'd ever been to this station," Sawyer said. "She lived in Boone. That's 40 miles from here." "Emmett drove to Boone sometimes," Marge said quietly. "He told me he was visiting a friend." Sawyer folded the page carefully, put it back in the folder, held the folder on his lap, looking at Emmett's tools hanging on the pegboard, each one in its outlined shape, each one exactly where it belonged. "He never met me," Sawyer said. "Emmett never knew I'd exist, but the reason I'm alive, the reason my grandmother survived long enough to have my mother, the reason any of us are here," he stopped, swallowed, "is because a man running a gas station on a road nobody uses decided to pay for a stranger's surgery and never told anyone." "That's who he was," Marge said. Sawyer nodded. He stood up, returned the folder to the cabinet, closed the drawer with care, and went back to work. But he stayed later than usual that night, and when he cleaned Emmett's tools before locking up, he handled each one like something that belonged to someone he wished he'd known, someone he owed his life to, even though they never asked for anything, especially because they never asked. That same week, Marge was alone in the station after closing, going through the filing cabinet herself. She'd been reading through the folders slowly, a few each night, learning the names, the stories, the invisible architecture of Emmett's life. She pulled a folder from the H section, held it up to the lamp on the counter. The label read Harlan. She opened it, expecting, she didn't know what. Maybe records of his own expenses, maybe notes about the station itself. Instead, she found a single sheet, same careful handwriting, same block letters. Leland Harlan, May 1991. Loan $5,000. Starting capital for real estate venture. Young man, engaged to my Marge, says he's going to build something. I believe him. Marge read it again. May 1991. 35 years ago. 2 years before she married Leland. Which meant Leland had come to Emmett. Before the wedding. Before the house on Briar Creek. Before the portfolio and the reputation and the charcoal suits. He'd come to a gas station on Route 11 and asked his future father-in-law for money, and Emmett gave it to him, $5,000, from a man who recorded every $50 loan, every $30 repair. $5,000 was a fortune. For Emmett, it was probably half of everything he had. There was no repayment record, no follow-up note, no paid back June or returned in installments. Nothing. The entry ended with the date and the amount, and then nothing. Leland never paid it back. Emmett never asked. And in 33 years of marriage, Leland never once mentioned it, never told Marge that the money that started his career, the the seed money for the first property, the foundation of everything he built, came from a gas station on a mountain road he later dismissed as worthless. Marge sat behind the counter holding the folder. The station was dark. The mountains were dark. The only light was the lamp on the counter, casting a circle of yellow on the wood, on Emmett's glasses, on the crossword, on the folder with her married name on it. She wasn't angry. She expected anger, wanted it, almost, because anger is clean. Anger is simple. Anger points at someone and says you did this and you should pay. But what she felt was sadder than anger, and more complicated, because Emmett didn't lend Leland that money as an investment. He didn't lend it expecting repayment. He lent it because a young man was standing in his station, saying he was going to build something. And Emmett believed him. And Emmett believed that helping people build things was what you did. When you had two hands and a gas station, and $5,000 you probably needed for yourself. And Leland took that money, and built everything he built, and became the man he became. And somewhere along the way, the man who was helped by kindness forgot what kindness looked like, or decided it wasn't efficient, or decided that kindness was for people who couldn't afford ambition. 35 years ago, Leland stood where Marge was standing now, and Emmett saw something good in him. Maybe Emmett was wrong, or maybe. 35 years ago, Emmett was right, and what happened after was just what money does to some people. Not changing them, revealing them, the way water reveals what's underneath a surface when it pulls back far enough. Marge put the folder back, closed the cabinet, turned off the lamp, sat in the dark. The man who was suing her for this gas station was the man this gas station had built. And the cruelest part, the part that sat in her chest like a stone, was that Emmett would not have been surprised. Emmett had written it all down, every kindness, every loan, every act of generosity that was never repaid. And he kept going, not because he expected gratitude, but because the giving was the point. The giving was always the point. Marge locked the front door, climbed the stairs, lay down on the mattress, and stared at the ceiling, and thought about Leland standing at this counter in 1991, 26 years old, nervous, ambitious, asking for help, and Emmett saying yes, without conditions, without a contract, without a single thought about what he'd get in return. She closed her eyes. Tomorrow she would figure out the lawyer. Tomorrow she would deal with the hearing. Tomorrow she would stand up. Again. Not because standing was easy, but because falling was worse. But tonight, she let the sadness be what it was, and she slept. And in the morning, she made coffee. Because that's what you do. Odell came by the next morning, early, before the coffee was ready, which for Odell was unusual. The man ran on caffeine and routine. Same truck, same time, same flannel shirt in a slightly different shade of plaid. But today he was early, and he wasn't carrying lumber. He was carrying a phone number, written on the back of a gas receipt, in pencil. The way mountain people write things they consider important. Pencil on paper, hands delivering what phones can't. "There's a woman in Barton," he said. "Name's Laureen Beckett, retired attorney. Quit practicing 5 or 6 years back. Moved up from Richmond." Marge poured him coffee. He took it, didn't drink, which meant whatever he was about to say mattered more than the coffee, and nothing mattered more to Odell than coffee. Her daughter was sick when she was little, heart condition, needed surgery the insurance wouldn't cover, the kind of surgery that costs more than a house, and the insurance company sends you a letter explaining why your child's life doesn't meet their criteria for coverage. Marge waited. Emmett paid for it. She set the coffee pot down, slowly. $3,200. Took it out of the station's earnings. Never told Laureen where it came from. Sent it through the hospital. Anonymous. Same way he always did it. "Same amount," Marge said. Quiet. Almost to herself. "What?" "The surgery for Sawyer's grandmother. Same amount. Same method. Through the hospital. Anonymous. Odell looked at her, then at the filing cabinet visible through the bay door. How many of those are in there? More than you'd believe. Odell picked up his coffee, drank, thought, set it down. Lorene found out eventually. Years later. The way everyone around here finds out everything. Somebody mentions something to somebody, and by Thursday it's not a secret anymore. He paused. She tried to pay Emmett back. He told her the money wasn't a loan. It was an investment, and the return was watching her daughter grow up healthy. You think she'd help me? Odell looked at Marge, the look of a man who has lived long enough to know how the world actually works. Not the world of lawyers and courts and motions, the real world, where a man fixes a stranger's furnace at midnight, and 30 years later, the debt comes back as a gift. I think if you tell her you're Emmett Harlan's daughter, and your ex-husband is trying to take what Emmett left you, she'll be here by tomorrow. He was off by 2 hours. Lorene Beckett arrived at 10 the next morning. Gray sedan. Clean but not new. The car of a woman who takes care of what she has and doesn't need to impress anyone with what she drives. She climbed out carrying a leather briefcase. The old-fashioned kind. Brown. Scuffed at the corners. The kind that has been inside more courtrooms than most lawyers will see in a lifetime. She was late 60s, tall, straight-backed. The posture of a woman who had spent decades standing in front of judges and never learned how to slouch, reading glasses on a chain around her neck. Silver hair cut short. No jewelry, no makeup. The face of someone who had stopped performing a long time ago and was comfortable with what was underneath. Marge met her on the porch. You're Emmett's daughter. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. She already knew. She just wanted to hear it confirmed. Marge Harlan. Lorene shook her hand. Firm. Dry. The handshake of a woman who had learned that the first 3 seconds tell you everything. Odell told me what's happening. I'd like to hear it from you. They sat at the counter, the legal letter between them like a patient on a table. Lorene put on her reading glasses, read the letter slowly, turning pages with the calm of someone who has read thousands of documents like this one. Thousands of threats dressed up in legalese. Thousands of attempts to take things from people who couldn't afford to fight back. When she finished, she set her glasses on the counter, right next to Emmett's. 2 pairs of reading glasses side by side, both belonging to people who had spent their lives looking carefully at things. This is a nuisance claim, she said. Your ex-husband's lawyers know it, and he probably knows it too. Then why file it? Because nuisance claims work. Not in court, in kitchens, in bedrooms, in the quiet hours when someone is sitting alone, wondering if they can afford to fight. Pressure until you fold. That's the strategy. It's not about winning. It's about making resistance cost more than surrender. Marge thought about Leland standing on the apron. Sunglasses. Silver SUV. I want what's fair. The same voice, the same certainty. Can he win? Not if the property was never marital. Was the station ever in both your names? No, it was Emmett's. He left it to me when he died. Did you and your husband ever use the property? Make improvements, pay taxes on it jointly. Leland never set foot in this station until last week. I haven't paid the taxes in years. The county sent notices, but the amounts were small and I let them pile up. That's actually helpful. If neither of you maintained or improved or used the property during the marriage, it stays separate. Your ex-husband has no claim. His lawyer cited a highway expansion. Lorene waved a hand, the gesture of someone swatting a fly. Speculative future value isn't grounds for reopening a settled agreement. They'd need to prove the value was deliberately concealed at the time of the divorce. Was it? His own lawyers appraised it at $14,000. They let me keep it without a fight. Then they assessed it and dismissed it. Lorene stood, collected the papers. That's their problem, Not yours. She looked at Marge over the top of her glasses. I'll need the original deed and any inheritance documents. Do you have them? My father kept everything. Then let's find them. Marge led her to the bay, to the green filing cabinet. They went through it drawer by drawer. Lorene was methodical, pulling folders, separating. Her fingers moved through the papers the way Sawyer's moved through engine parts, with the confidence of repetition. The original deed was in the bottom drawer, in a manila envelope labeled Property in Emmett's handwriting. Inside, the deed from Emmett's father, dated 1971, transferring the land and building to Emmett Robert Harlan. Below it, a copy of Emmett's will, witnessed, notarized, leaving the property solely to Marge Ann Harlan. Lorene held both documents up to the light coming through the bay door, studying them the way a jeweler studies a stone, looking for flaws. This is clean, she said. The property passed from your grandfather to your father, and from your father to you. It was never jointly held, never commingled with marital assets, never improved with marital funds. She set the papers on the workbench, right next to the groove Marge had carved when she was 9. His motion will be dismissed. You're sure? I practiced law for 31 years before I retired. I'm sure. Marge leaned against the workbench, and the relief came. Not fast, not dramatic. Slowly, like water finding a crack in a dam, loosening something in her shoulders, in her chest, in the place behind her eyes where she'd been holding everything tight since the envelope arrived. What do I owe you? She asked. Lorene looked at her, not offended, something deeper, something that had to do with time, and debt, and the particular mathematics of the valley, where the currency wasn't dollars. Your father paid for my daughter's surgery when I couldn't. He never asked for anything. He never even told me it was him. She picked up her briefcase from the workbench, snapped the clasp shut with a sound that was final, decisive. There's nothing you owe me, Marge. This one was paid for a long time ago. She left her card on the counter, drove away in the gray sedan, down the mountain, around the curve, gone. Marge stood on the porch and stayed there a while after the car was out of sight, not thinking, not planning, just standing, in the sun, on a porch her father built, above a station her grandfather started, on a road that most maps had forgotten, and feeling, for the first time in all of this, that she was standing on something solid the night before the hearing. Marge couldn't sleep. 6 weeks had passed since Lorene first sat at the counter. 6 weeks of preparation, of documents gathered, of phone calls between Lorene and Barrett's office, of the slow grinding machinery of the court, scheduling what should have been a simple matter. But tonight wasn't about the case. Lorene had told her the documents were clean. The outcome was certain. Tonight was something else, something that felt more like a vigil than a crisis. She got up, went downstairs. The station was dark except for the faint blue glow through the windows. She sat behind the counter, opened Emmett's journal. She'd read most of it by now. The early entries, the middle years, the names she was beginning to know, but she hadn't read the last pages, the final entries, written in handwriting that was shakier than the rest, the hand of a man whose body was slowing down, even as his heart stayed the same. She turned to the last page that had writing on it. The date was 3 months before he died. Today nobody came. Road was empty. Station was quiet. I made coffee for 2 and drank it alone, which I've been doing more often lately. Sat behind the counter most of the morning. Tried the crossword. Got stuck on 28 across. Put the pen down. Started thinking, which is dangerous. An old man with too much time and a pen and an empty road. 40 years. That's how long I've been here. Behind this counter, under these mountains. How much money have I given away? I stopped counting a long time ago. How many cars have I fixed for free? How many furnaces? How many envelopes in how many mailboxes at how many midnight hours? And I wonder, sometimes, whether it mattered, whether any of it mattered. Because the road is still empty. The station is still quiet. The coffee is still for two and drunk by one. And the people I helped. Some of them moved away. Some of them forgot. Some of them were never supposed to remember because that was the whole point. So what was it for? Marge stopped reading. Her throat was tight. Because this wasn't the Emmett she'd been constructing in her mind. The saint. The quiet hero. The man who gave without question and never doubted. This was a man sitting alone in a gas station, wondering if his life had mattered, wondering if the kindness had been worth the cost. She kept reading. Then tonight, just now. I walked to the window, and I looked out, and I could see Odell's light on the ridge, a quarter-mile up the mountain, that yellow porch light he leaves on because his wife was afraid of the dark, and he never turned it off after she passed. And I remembered, winter before last, his furnace died. Middle of January, 20 degrees. I drove up there at 6 in the morning, fixed the ignition switch. Took me an hour. He tried to pay me with a ham. I told him to keep the ham. And his light is on tonight because of that. His house is warm. His porch is lit. Because I fixed a switch. One light. On a dark mountain. Because I showed up. And I thought, that's enough. One light is enough. I don't need the whole valley to remember. I don't need a parade or a plaque or a thank you. I just need to look out the window and see that one light burning on the ridge and know it stays on because of me. That's enough. That has to be enough. Marge closed the journal, pressed her palm flat against the cover. Because Emmett wasn't a saint. He was a man, a tired man, a doubting man, a man who sat alone and wondered whether 40 years of invisible kindness had been worth it. And his answer wasn't certainty. His answer was a porch light on a ridge, one small light in a lot of darkness, and the decision, made fresh every morning with a pot of coffee for two, that one light was enough. Marge looked up. Through the window. The apartment above the bay was dark except for one window, where a lamp was on, where Sawyer was sitting at the counter with his laptop open, studying diesel diagnostics, taking notes in a composition book, teaching himself the things he needed to know to become the person he was becoming. One light, burning on the ridge. She closed the journal, set it on the counter, next to Emmett's glasses, next to the crossword, and she had her answer. Not about the hearing. She already knew how the hearing would go. Her answer was bigger than that. If she lost the station, she would still be Marge. If Leland took the building, sold the land, tore down the walls, she would still be the woman who pulled the kudzu, who made the coffee, who checked the tires, who learned to say no and mean it. The station didn't make her who she was. She made the station what it was, the way Emmett had. Not with money, not with property, with presence, with the daily ordinary act of showing up, of keeping the light on, of leaving the door open. Marge went upstairs, lay down, and slept, deeply, without dreaming, and in the morning, she put on the only good shirt she owned, and drove to the courthouse. The courtroom was smaller than the one where she'd signed her divorce papers. Different county, different judge, same fluorescent lights, same smell of floor polish, same wooden chairs designed to make you feel temporary. Leland sat in the front row, Barrett beside him, still wearing the charcoal suit, still checking the expensive watch, but something about both of them looked less certain than the last time she'd seen them across a courtroom table. Leland was wearing the navy polo, the uniform of a man who has enough money to dress casually in places where everyone else wears suits. He didn't look at Marge. Lorene was already seated at the respondent's table. Briefcase open. 3 documents arranged in front of her. The original deed, Emmett's will, and a chain of title summary from the county clerk's office. 3 pieces of paper. That was all she'd brought. Marge sat beside her. Nervous? Lorene asked, without looking up. No, and she meant it. 3 months ago, she'd been paralyzed choosing between coffee and tea. And now she was sitting in a courtroom waiting for a judge to decide the fate of her father's gas station. And her hands were still. The hearing lasted 20 minutes. 20 minutes. After 6 weeks of preparation. After sleepless nights and legal letters, and Leland's silver SUV in the parking lot, and Jolene's voice on the phone saying, "Sell it, Mom. Just sell it." 20 minutes. Lorene presented the deed first, explained the chain of ownership, grandfather to father, father to daughter, never jointly held, never commingled. The property existed outside the marriage, before the marriage, after the marriage, independent of the marriage in every legal sense. She presented the will, witnessed, notarized, sole beneficiary, Marge Ann Harlan. She presented the tax records. Neither Leland nor Marge had paid property taxes on the station during the marriage. The county had sent notices. The amounts were minimal. Nobody responded, which proved neither party had maintained or invested in the property. Then she said the thing that mattered most. The petitioner's own legal team appraised this property at $14,000 during the divorce proceedings. They assessed it, evaluated it, and dismissed it as negligible. They did not contest its transfer to the respondent. They did not argue its value. They let it go. She paused. Let the courtroom absorb it. This property was separate before the marriage, and separate at dissolution. The petitioner cannot now claim an interest in an asset his own attorneys chose to ignore. There is no legal basis for reopening the settlement. The judge reviewed the documents, took his time. He looked at Barrett. Counsel. Rebuttal. Barrett stood, adjusted his cuffs, cleared his throat, and said something about potential future value, about equitable distribution, about the highway expansion and projected land assessments. But there was nothing behind the words, no foundation, no evidence, just the echo of an argument that had sounded convincing in a conference room but collapsed in a courtroom. The judge shook his head. Motion denied, he said. The property was never marital. This matter is closed. Closed. The words sat in the room, in the fluorescent light, in the silence that followed. Leland sat very still. Barrett gathered his papers, the rustling of documents being put away, the sound of a case that was over. Marge exhaled. Long, slow, from somewhere deep. Lorene closed her briefcase. Click. Final. That's that, she said quietly. That's that. Outside, the afternoon sun was warm on the courthouse steps, the kind of warmth that doesn't demand anything, that just sits on your skin and lets you feel it. Marge was walking toward the truck when she heard footsteps behind her. She knew the sound, measured, deliberate. She turned. Leland was standing on the bottom step, his jacket over one arm, sunglasses in his hand, not wearing them. For once, his eyes visible, and in them, something Marge hadn't seen before, not in 33 years. He looked tired, not the kind of tired that sleep fixes, the kind that lives underneath, in the place where a person keeps the things they don't look at. He stood there, on the step, and Marge waited, because she'd learned something about waiting, from Emmett, from the porch, from the mountains themselves. You wait, not because you don't have anything to say, but because sometimes the other person needs the silence more than you need to fill it. When did you become this person? Leland asked. The same question he'd asked at the station. But different now. At the station it had been confusion. Here, on the courthouse steps, after losing. It was something else, something that might have been the first honest question he'd asked in 33 years. Marge looked at him and reached into the bag she'd brought to court, pulled out a folder. Manila, labeled in Emmett's handwriting, Harlan. She held it out to him. Leland took it, opened it, read. His face changed. Not all at once, in stages, the way paint fades, slowly. Then suddenly you notice everything is different. $5,000, Marge said. 1991, 2 years before we got married. You went to my father's gas station and asked him for money, and he gave it to you because you told him you were going to build something, and he believed you. Leland stared at the paper. He never asked you to pay it back. He never mentioned it to me. He never mentioned it to anyone. He just wrote it down in his records, the same way he wrote down every family he helped, every loan he made. Leland didn't speak. His jaw was working, the small movement of someone chewing on something they can't swallow. The man who gave you that money, Marge said, is the same man whose station you just tried to take from me. She let the words land. My father didn't call it a debt. He wrote it down the same way he wrote down everything else, because he believed that's what you do when someone needs help. You help. You don't keep score. You don't calculate the return. You just show up. Leland looked up from the paper, at Marge, standing on the courthouse steps in her only good shirt, driving a truck with 160,000 miles, living above a gas station. He thought you were a good man, Marge said. That's why he helped you, not because you were marrying his daughter, not because he expected anything, because he looked at you and saw someone worth helping. She paused. I don't know if he was right, but I know he believed it, and I know you never told me. Leland held the folder. His face was not still. Something was moving behind it. If you were being generous, the beginning of recognition. If you were being honest. Shame. He didn't apologize. Marge didn't expect him to. Some men don't have that word in their vocabulary, not because they don't feel it, because they've spent so long being right that being wrong feels like a language they never learned. Leland closed the folder, held it at his side. I didn't know he kept records, he said, quietly. He kept records of everyone. Leland nodded. Once, slowly, the mountain nod, the one Odell used, the one that means I'm filing this somewhere, it will be treated with respect, even if I don't know what to do with it yet. He turned, walked to the silver SUV, got in, closed the door, and drove away. Not fast, not angry, quietly, the way a man drives when the road ahead suddenly looks different from the road he thought he was on. Marge stood on the steps, watching, until the silver was gone. Then she walked to the truck, got in, turned the key. The engine caught on the first try this time, which felt like something. She pulled out of the parking lot and drove home. The word came without effort, and she let it stay. Home. 2 weeks after the hearing. A plain white envelope arrived at the station. No return address, no letter inside, just a check. $5,000, no signature on the memo line. No note. Marge didn't need a signature. She held the check for a long time, standing behind the counter, in the lamplight, next to Emmett's glasses, next to the crossword. She didn't cash it. She opened the filing cabinet, pulled the Harlan folder, placed the check inside, next to Emmett's original note, the loan from 1991, and the single line of handwriting. Young man, engaged to my Marge, says he's going to build something. I believe him. She closed the folder, closed the drawer, closed the cabinet. Some debts aren't paid with money, and some payments, when they finally come. The person who owed them looked at themselves long enough to see what they owed. Late, but not too late. Marge didn't know if Leland would change. People who spend 60 years measuring the world one way don't usually learn a new system overnight. But the check was something. A crack in the wall, a vine pulled free, one small opening where light could get in, one light on the ridge. The dogwoods along Route 11 were blooming when Jolene came back, 3 months after the hearing. Spring had come to the valley the way it always did. slowly, and then all at once, white blossoms pressing against the green canopy, the air smelling like warm earth and new growth, the kind of air that makes you breathe deeper than you need to, just because you can. The station was alive. The pumps ran every day. Sawyer handled most of the repair work. The coffee pot stayed on from 6 in the morning until whoever left last turned it off, which was usually Odell, who had developed a habit of sitting on the porch until well after dark, playing checkers against whoever showed up, winning more than he admitted, losing more than he confessed. Sawyer had changed. Not in any way you'd notice unless you'd known him at the beginning. He still arrived early, still stayed late, still worked with the same quiet focus. But there was a steadiness to him now, something settled. He'd enrolled in an online certification program for diesel mechanics, studying on a used laptop Marge had bought with money from the station's earnings. He sat at the counter after hours, taking notes in a composition book with careful handwriting, small, neat, slanting slightly to the right. When Marge mentioned the similarity to Emmett's hand, Sawyer shrugged. Good handwriting is good handwriting. Marge watched him one morning through the bay door, walking a nervous teenager through her first oil change, patient, step by step, letting her hold the wrench, feel the bolt loosen, understand what was happening and why. "You're good at this," Marge said afterward. "At what? Teaching." He looked uncomfortable, like a compliment was a gift he didn't know where to put. "I'm just showing her what goes where. That's what teaching is." Jolene arrived on a Saturday, unannounced. Marge was on the porch with 2 regulars. Coffee, checkerboard, the easy silence of people who don't need to talk to enjoy each other's company. A rental car pulled into the lot, silver, which for one cold second made Marge's stomach tighten before she saw the rental sticker on the bumper. Jolene sat in the car for a full minute before getting out. Marge watched her through the windshield. Her daughter's face, 32 years old, the face that was half Marge and half Leland, and entirely its own. She was wearing a white blouse, tailored pants, clothes that belonged in a design office, not a gravel lot on a mountain road. She got out, walked toward the station, each step careful, deliberate, the walk of someone entering a place they'd already decided was a mistake, but hadn't decided how to leave. "Mom, Jolene, you didn't call. I wanted to see for myself." Marge knew what that meant. Jolene had come to measure the damage, to build a case, to find the evidence she needed for whatever intervention she'd been planning since their last phone call. She'd come looking for a reason to say, "I told you so. Come inside. I'll pour you a cup." Jolene followed her in and stopped just inside the door. The station looked nothing like what she'd expected. Marge could see it in her face. The recalculation, the surprise she was trying not to show. Clean windows, stocked shelves, the coffee maker, Emmett's glasses on the counter beside the crossword, a framed photograph Odell had brought weeks ago, Emmett and 6-year-old Marge, standing in front of the station, both of them squinting into the sun. Sawyer walked in from the bay, wiping his hands on a rag. He nodded at Jolene, polite, brief, the greeting of a man who respects boundaries he hasn't been invited to cross. "This is Sawyer," Marge said. "He runs the bay." "Ma'am," Sawyer said, and went back to work. Jolene sat on the stool behind the counter, looked around the room, slowly, taking inventory. "It's not what I expected," she said. "What did you expect? Something I could point to and say, 'Mom, this isn't working.'" Marge poured 2 mugs, set one in front of her daughter, through the window. Odell's truck pulled in with a load of firewood. He waved at the building without stopping, stacked the wood along the side wall, drove off. "Who was that?" "Odell, your grandfather's closest friend. He just shows up with firewood. Every week." Jolene stared into her coffee. Marge waited, not filling the silence, not rescuing anyone from the discomfort of their own thoughts. "Dad says you're being unreasonable," Jolene said, "holding on to this place out of spite." "What do you think?" Jolene looked up. Her eyes were wet. But she wasn't crying. She was holding. The way women hold things, in that space between the feeling and the showing, where everything is real but nothing is visible. "I think you're different," she said. "I don't know what happened here, but you're not the same person who walked out of that courtroom." The words sat between them, on the counter, between the coffee mugs. "I sided with Dad," Jolene said. "During the divorce. You know that?" "I know. It was easier. He had the answers. He always had answers. And you just agreed. With everything." She paused, looked at her hands. "I didn't respect that." The words landed. Marge felt them, in her chest, in the place where she kept the things that hurt the most. Not because they were cruel, but because they were accurate. "You were right not to," Marge said. Jolene looked surprised. "I spent a long time agreeing because it was easier. That's not something to respect." Marge picked up her coffee, held it with both hands. "But I'm done agreeing." They sat. The afternoon light moved across the floor, dust motes drifting through it. The building settled around them, creaking, breathing, holding, and the silence between them wasn't distance, it was rest. Jolene came back in May, and this time she brought her children, a boy of 9, a girl of 6, both wearing city clothes and wide eyes. They climbed out of the rental car and looked at the station, at the mountains, at the gravel lot and the pumps and the sign, and a world that existed so far from their own, it might as well have been another planet. "This is where your great-grandpa Emmett worked," Jolene told them. The boy studied the building. "It's small." "Big enough," Marge said from the doorway. She took them through the station first, showed them the counter, the reading glasses, the crossword. She opened the lockbox, empty now except for the original keys. Let them hold the brass one that opened the filing cabinet. Let them feel the weight of it. The girl was fascinated by the cash register, the old mechanical kind, with buttons that clicked. Marge let her ring up an imaginary sale. The girl pressed the keys with both index fingers, concentrating. The drawer popped open with a ding. Then Marge took them to the bay. Sawyer was under a truck when they walked in. He slid out on the creeper, wiped his hands, said hello with the careful awkwardness of someone who hadn't spent much time around children and wasn't sure how loud to be. Marge showed them Emmett's tools. She lifted the boy up so he could see the pegboard, the outlines, every wrench and socket and screwdriver in its designated place, a map of usefulness drawn in black marker. She walked them to the truck parked inside, pulled the tire pressure gauge from the hook where Emmett kept it. "Press it here," she told the boy, showing him the valve stem. "And this number tells you if there's enough air." "What if there isn't?" "Then you add some. Compressor's right there." The boy pressed the gauge, watched the needle. 32, he read. "Perfect. You just did your first tire check." He grinned, wide, unguarded. The grin of a child who has just discovered he can do something real, something that matters, something that isn't a screen or a game, but a tool in his hand and a number that means something. And Marge felt it. In her chest, a fullness, not the fullness of food or air, the fullness of time, folding over on itself, standing in the same spot where she'd stood at his age, learning the same thing from Emmett, holding the same gauge, reading the same number, grinning the same grin. She looked at Jolene, standing in the bay door, watching, and what was on Jolene's face wasn't worry anymore, wasn't calculation, wasn't the expression of someone building a case. It was recognition. That evening, after the children fell asleep on the couch upstairs, Marge and Jolene sat on the porch. The sky was clear. Stars. The whole impossible weight of them. "I was wrong," Jolene said. About what? All of it. This place. You. She turned her mug. Slowly. Dad. Marge didn't push. She'd learned that from Emmett. From the journal. From the porch and the coffee and the waiting. You let people arrive at the truth on their own. You don't drag them. You don't rush them. When they get there, you pour them another cup. He called me last week, Jolene said. Sounded different, quieter. He asked about you. What did you tell him? The truth. That you're doing better than anyone expected. That the station is running and people come from all over the valley. She paused. I told him you turned into someone he never imagined you could be. And he said, nothing. He just was quiet. For a long time. Marge reached over, squeezed her daughter's hand, felt Jolene's fingers close around hers, holding on. He wasn't a bad man, Marge said. He just measured the wrong things. They sat, together, on the porch, while the stars did what stars do, which is burn, quietly, without asking for anything. The last day of this story, but not the last day of Marge's. Late afternoon, sun dropping behind the western ridge, the light going golden, long, the kind of light that makes everything look the way you want to remember it. A minivan pulled into the lot. Road dusty, cracked taillight. A young woman climbed out, maybe 30, faded jacket, jeans, 3 children in the back seat. The youngest asleep in a car seat, the oldest watching through the window with eyes that had already seen too much. The woman looked at the pumps, at the station, at Marge on the porch. She had the expression Marge had seen on other faces, and in her own mirror. Someone carrying more than she could hold, and trying not to let anyone see how heavy it was. Could I get some gas? Of course. Marge walked to the pump, filled the tank, checked the oil, topped off the windshield fluid, noticed the front left tire was low, added air, didn't ask, didn't mention it, just did it. The pump clicked off. The woman opened her purse, dug through it. Marge could see her fingers moving past receipts and loose change and expired coupons, the quick motion of someone counting what they have, and hoping. Pay it next time you're through, Marge said. The woman looked up. What? Next time you drive through, you can pay then. I can't just... Sure you can. Marge smiled. I'll be here. The woman stared at her, her eyes filled, not with sadness, with the shock of unexpected kindness. We armor ourselves against cruelty. We expect hardness. We brace for the no, and when someone says yes, for no reason, with no conditions, it breaks something open that we didn't know was closed. Why? The woman asked. Marge looked at her, at the children in the back seat, at the cracked taillight, at the road behind her and the road ahead. Because my father used to say the same thing. The woman drove away. Full tank, aired tires, topped fluids, and a story she would carry with her, the way all of them carried their stories. Everyone who had stopped at this station, everyone who had been helped by Emmett, and now by his daughter, who was standing on the porch, watching the minivan disappear around the curve. The same curve, every time, coming or going, arriving or leaving. Marge closed up the station at dusk. Sawyer had locked the bay, gone upstairs. His light was on. Studying. Odell's firewood was stacked along the wall. The checkerboard on the porch railing was set up for tomorrow's game. She turned off the lights, one by one, the front room, the stock room, the counter lamp. Each switch a small closing, a small goodnight. She picked up Emmett's reading glasses, cleaned them with the hem of her shirt, set them back. Next to the crossword, 27 across was filled in, Emmett's careful block letters. 28 across was blank. She looked at it. for a long time. Then she picked up the pen. Emmett's pen. The one he kept beside the register. The one he used for the crossword, for the journal, for the letters he never sent, and the records he never showed anyone. She read the clue for 28 across, and she filled it in, not because she knew the answer, but because some things need finishing, and some things need to stay unfinished, and knowing the difference is the whole point. She set the pen down, beside the glasses, beside the crossword, now complete, after 12 years. She locked the front door, with the key her father had turned 10,000 times before her. Through the glass, she could see the sign. She walked to the breaker panel, found the switch, labeled in Emmett's handwriting. Sign. She flipped it, and through the front window, the glow, faded letters, hand-painted, old, but lit, against the darkening sky, against the mountains going black, against the first stars appearing above the ridge. Harlan Gas in service. One light, burning on the ridge. Marge climbed the stairs, to the apartment that smelled like coffee and motor oil and something else, something that didn't have a name, but felt like the place where all the roads you've ever traveled finally stop, and you realize you're not lost. You're home. She was 58 years old. She had a gas station, a mechanic, a porch full of people, a daughter who was learning, a filing cabinet full of kindness, and a crossword puzzle. Finally finished. She was just getting started.